I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the quickest Hyundai N product yet, the new Hyundai i30 Sedan N. If you're watching from overseas and wondering what an i30 Sedan N is, well, it's the car behind me. It's got a bit of an identity crisis, this model. In most markets, it's called the Elantra N. In its home market, it's called the Avante N, but out here in Australia, it's the i30 Sedan N. Not the i30 N sedan, the i30 Sedan N. Either way, this is Hyundai's new small sedan with a hot motor up front. It matches the i30 N hatchback in that it uses a 2-litre turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder, making 206 kilowatts of power and 392 Newton meters of torque. What you'll find in the cabin of this car is either an 8-speed wet clutch DCT automatic or a 6-speed manual transmission. Australia almost didn't get the manual, but Hyundai Motor Company Australia decided to invest in the tooling to do it for our market. So both of them cost $49,000. And as we'll find out in this video, the i30 Sedan N lets you jump into a pretty spacious 4-door with a boot with an absolutely raspy, rorty engine up the front, a manual gearbox if you want it, a DCT if you don't want to row your own. And this thing is actually pretty great fun out on the road, not least because it's actually lighter than the i30N hatch. Now we're going to do our usual thing in today's video. We'll jump into the cabin, check out what we're working with in there for our 49 grand. We'll have a look at the back seat and the boot, discuss the running costs, and then we'll head out onto the road and the track at Sydney Motorsport Park in the new i30 Sedan N to see whether it's worth your money. But before we get started, hit subscribe down below the video and the notification bell. Jumping into the cabin of the i30 Sedan N, we start with the underlying sort of shape of the dashboard from the CN7 i30 Sedan or CN7 Elantra, but there are a number of bespoke N items in here that set this vehicle apart, which is important because it sits at the top of the range. It's 49 grand plus on road, so 50 something with driveway pricing included, and in many ways it feels up to that price. And it starts with this steering wheel, which is perforated black leather, performance blue stitching, and performance blue shortcut buttons down here. Now Hyundai have actually gone the way of Audi RS in more ways than one actually. These actually get you into a custom N mode number 1 and a custom N mode number 2. It used to be just cycling through the drive modes like eco and other stuff you'll never use over here, and then an N button over here. Instead, you can make this custom for one set of roads and this one custom for track use, for instance, which is pretty cool. And all of that customization happens through this 10.25 inch touchscreen up here, which has a really cool N screen that lets you change the characteristics of the steering, suspension, the transmission here in the DCT model, or the rev matching in the 6-speed manual, the LSD, the stability control, and the exhaust. You can customize all that stuff, and the engine response too. You can watch your G-force graphic, and we also have a circuit detection system in here that knows when you're drawing near to a recognized track, and it uses the car's GPS to set your lap times without you having to really do anything. Now, at the moment, Sydney Motorsport Park, Eastern Creek, and Wakefield Park are loaded into the system, but Hyundai promise a range of other Australian tracks will be included in early 2022, so we're going to watch that one, but I'll be testing that later in this video at Motorsport Park. In front of me, I've also got another 10.25 inch digital screen. It doesn't have the blind spot cameras, which is a bit of a shame, but it does have the crisp, bright, high resolution graphics, and if we go into one of the N modes, a further look sort of similar to an Audi RS, where we get a big tacho in the center there. We get quick feed data on your turbo or boost pressure, the torque the car is producing, and your temperatures for both the oil and the engine. And that's pretty cool, and you can kind of have a quick glance at your attributes for your engine response, steering, and suspension sitting right in front of you. Now, because this vehicle is the 8-speed DCT, we have sort of metal effect paddle shifters behind the wheel. Naturally, the manual doesn't get those. The other key difference between the DCT and the manual, apart from, of course, the shifter that sits between the seats, is this red button here on the steering wheel. In the DCT, it says NGS, that stands for N Grin Shift. Effectively, it's a push-to-pass button. You get 20 seconds of overboost, 213 kilowatts of power from the engine, and maximum response from the DCT transmission as well. On the manual, this is simply an on-off switch for the automatic rev matching feature. In terms of further N changes to the interior, you get these good seats, so they are perforated black leather seats with blue stitching, performance blue stitching. They're heated and cooled, driver gets power adjustment, 10 ways of it, and memory manual adjustment for the passenger seat over here, but they're quite comfortable. I don't think they're as aggressive as the seats in the i30 N hatch, but that sort of goes with the character of this car, which is a little bit more GT car, a little bit more refined than the i30 N hatch, and that's something we'll see when we take it out onto the road as well. But what about sort of this underlying i30 sedan interior? Well, mostly it's pretty good. The design is cool, modern. You do get soft padding up here on the dash, but unfortunately, like all of the door skins and down here is all scratchy plastic. Let's not pretend that this car isn't an affordable option for the kind of performance you're getting out of it, so we can't expect the world of it. But that's one area where it'll differ to, I guess, a key rival, which would be something like the Audi S3 sedan. Down here we've got a climate panel, nice and easy to use. You do get buttons in this car for the stuff you'd want buttons for. You get CarPlay and Android Auto, but only with a cable. It's not wireless in this vehicle. But you do get an 8-speaker Bose stereo, so it's not that high on the speaker count, but the clarity of the system is actually really good. Your music sounds great through it. And this car isn't as loud inside as an i30 N hatch, so you actually can enjoy your music quite a bit. Partially that's down to the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tyres, which are quite a bit softer in terms of the noise they throw up than the Pirelli P0s that have been standard on i30 N products up until this point. Above me is a $2,000 option. It's a porthole sunroof. The only other option is $495 for premium paint on the vehicle. So that's a look up front. Let's have a look at the back seat, which is pretty cavernous. The biggest difference between the i30 Sedan N and the i30 N hatch is back seat space and boot space. And they also drive quite differently, but there you go. So where I'm sitting here, you can see that the legroom in this thing is just enormous. I've got this seat set to my driving position. You know, I've got 20 centimeters of legroom or something like that. Toe room is good. And headroom for a 6-footer, I've got about an inch left or so that's absolutely fine. You could get someone in the middle if you needed to. This car is a bit wider than the i30 N hatch. There's only a small hump in the floor as well. You don't get a center armrest in this car, which would have been a nice addition, so 4 people could be really comfortable in the vehicle, but you do get air vents back here. All hard plastic though. Something to remember is actually the i30 N hatch has really high quality interior materials, including soft touch plastics on both the front doors and the rear doors. Now I know that's not going to matter to that many people in a hot little sedan like this, but at 50 grand, it kind of does matter to me. You get a mat pocket behind the passenger seat, and the angle for your thighs on the back seat is pretty good. So you feel fairly supported back here. The view out of the window is decent. So all in all, it's a nice, spacious sedan second row. Moving here behind the i30 Sedan N, the first thought that I have is that this vehicle actually wears the N styling cues well. I sort of thought that the i30 Sedan or the new Elantra, whatever you call it, was, you know, it's overstyled. I think that's probably fair to say. This vehicle wears Hyundai's parametric design language, and while it is absolutely cool and has a whole bunch of sharp lines that'll almost cut your fingers, I think in base spec with small wheels, it's a bit much. But here as an N, this absolutely works. You can tell this is actually like what they designed the car around this model in mind. We've got these really nice big 19-inch wheels that hide 360mm discs at the front. We've got the red trim if you go for any color apart from a red car, which then gets gray trim around the lower part of the vehicle. We've got this really cool illuminated light bar here at the back. We've got a black wing, and we've got the N characteristic triangular fog light on this particular car. I still think that's coolest on the hatch, how it's the third brake light, but that's just me. Now, speaking of the hatch, the sedan is massive compared to it. It's 33 centimeters longer. It's basically a mid-size car. Like, we still call this a small car here in Australia, but it feels mid-size, which kind of makes the position of the Sonata N line a little unusual, although that's even bigger again. Also, compared to the hatch, the sedan is 30 millimeters wider and it's 30 millimeters lower to the ground in terms of overall height. We have a button here to release the manual boot lid. That opens up to reveal a 454 litre boot, which is usefully about 70 litres bigger than the hatchback. Being a sedan, of course, the aperture is the main restriction, but then the boot itself actually goes back a really long way to some red additional bracing. It doesn't look easily removable like the one in the hatchback is, although I don't know how many people are in their i30 N hatch taking out the sort of additional rigid bar that often anyway, but I guess it's a very usable size, this vehicle, if you need to carry suitcases on the reg. We do have pulls here to release those back seats, so you can fold them if you needed to, and then you can work your way around the bracing. But it's a bit of a ghetto boot. We don't have any handle here to help us drop it, so you've got to touch the paint, which is, you know, a bit dirty if you've been actually driving this car the way it wants to be driven. We've got a cable here. It's just not that well finished. But underneath the boot floor, we do have a space saver spare, and then it closes down nice and easily. Very light piece, that boot. So what's it going to cost you to run an i30 Sedan N? Well, this car actually has remarkably low ownership costs, which is a really big part of the appeal. It's not that expensive to buy, and it's not that expensive to service, particularly if you purchase a prepaid servicing plan from Hyundai when you put your money down on this car. A 5-year plan, which covers 50,000 kilometers of motoring, costs $1,675, which is pretty cheap for a performance car like this, particularly one with an actual mechanically locking limited slip differential and complicated parts like that. Keep in mind though, it's not 75,000 Ks of servicing, which is what we would usually expect over 5 years, and that's what you get on an Audi S3, for instance. The warranty on the vehicle is 5 years with unlimited kilometers, which is good, although it does trail Kia's 7-year unlimited kilometer warranty. In terms of insurance, over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $899 to comprehensively insure a new Hyundai i30, keeping in mind that includes the whole i30 range. Everybody's situation varies, and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, how you garage the car, your driving history, etc. And lastly, fuel consumption, probably not this car's best attribute. On my touring run yesterday up and down the putty road here in Sydney, I managed 8 litres per 100 Ks. That was pretty spirited driving, I won't lie to you. Kind of around town in traffic, you should expect about 10 litres per 100. So not as frugal as something like that S3 I just mentioned, although not stratospheric either. So what is the i30 Sedan N like to drive, and how have Hyundai managed to kind of distill the N experience into a vehicle that is, I think, probably designed to be a little bit more refined, a little bit more comfortable and compliant than the i30 N hatch, which is of course a traditional hot hatch. This is a sedan, and I guess the easy thing to do would just have been to transplant everything from the i30 N hatch into the sedan and not make any changes. But that wouldn't have been possible, because while this car is called an i30, at least out here in Australia, it runs a completely different platform to the hatch. The hatch is the PD i30, this is the CN7 i30 sedan. There are some common components, but the actual chassis itself is really different. I mean, I think I mentioned when I was having a look in the boot that it's 33 centimeters longer. Something like that fundamentally changes how a car handles, and so for all intents and purposes, despite the fact this is called i30, it's a different car to the i30 N hatch that we know and love. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive it here on the road. I'm going to talk about how it works as a daily driver and how it works as a car to, you know, go and burn up and down your favorite mountain road, and then we're going to take it on track. And I think it shows how confident Hyundai are in the car that we're going to be tracking it at Sydney Motorsport Park, which is sort of the premier tier track here in New South Wales. And it's a big, fast track. It's really taxing on any car, but particularly something hot hatch based, I guess, if you like, and front wheel drive. So that should be absolutely illuminating. But first of all, let's talk about on-road performance. So under the bonnet, the i30 Sedan N shares the, I guess, N family engine, the 2-litre turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder Theta engine that produces 206 kilowatts of power and 392 Newton meters of torque. In the DCT, you also get an N grin shift function, which gives you push to pass capability. It gives you 20 seconds of overboost and maximum performance from the DCT as well. So it's actually quite a powerful little unit now, and it's a little bit more powerful and torquier than it was when it launched initially out here in Australia in 2017. And in a car like this much power and torque is absolutely sufficient and serviceable. It's pretty quick, 5.3 seconds 0 to 100 for the DCT, the 8-speed wet clutch DCT, and 5.5 seconds for the 6-speed manual. So a little bit of a performance deficit for the manual, but in terms of the fun that transmission offers up and the fact that they won't be around forever, I think it's absolutely worth considering. Now, the engine itself is, I wouldn't call it sparkling. It's never been sparkling in any i30, but what it is meaty, and it offers up that full 392 Newton meters of torque in a really broad band that basically stretches from 2,000 RPM right up through to 4,500 RPM or so. And so the overriding characteristic of this engine is that it's just able to pull you out of situations even if you're in too high a gear. Now that's particularly relevant for the manual, of course, but the DCT having 8 ratios, really snappy shifts, this is a really good dual clutch automatic. That kind of thing doesn't matter so much. And you've got paddle shifters here. The DCT itself is often, or almost always, in the right gear, particularly if you start dialing up the transmission settings through the N custom mode. Much like the original i30 N, there's really extensive customization available to you through that N custom setting that I demonstrated when we were static in the car, but really you can dial in the characteristics that you want into the engine response, the DCT snappiness and the aggression of the shifts. You can really be thrown every time it shifts if you like that. Personally, I like it a little bit smoother, but that's just the whole reason why there's 3 settings for that aggression, for instance. There's 3 settings of damping that you can choose from for the suspension, 3 settings of steering weight, 2 settings of LSD aggression. You can have ESC Sport, you can have ESC completely off, so you can actually tailor the driving experience to what you want from the car as opposed to certain characteristics being imposed upon you, and you've got shortcut keys right here to make getting to those settings really easy. Now, spec for spec, the i30 Sedan N is actually a little bit lighter than the PD i30 N hatch. There's not a huge amount in it, but it's quite interesting given this is kind of a notably bigger car. And I think I'm not going to go out there and tell you that you can feel like a few kilograms difference, but the way the weight is distributed in the car is also, remarkably different. It's a much longer vehicle, it has a longer wheelbase, and so the handling is quite distinct from the i30 N hatch. The i30 N hatch to me feels a little bit more tightly wound, a little bit more serious as a performance car. You're really dialed into it, and everywhere you go in the i30 N hatch, it is, wanting to play with you the whole time, and I love it for that. What the i30 Sedan N brings to the table is actually more of a GT car persona, but, and this is a big but, when you get to a really good, tight, technical, twisting bit of mountain road, I personally did the potty road twice yesterday in this car, it suddenly turns on a hot hatch character. It is really nimble, it turns in really well, and it has a beautifully tuned, Australian tuned, stability control system that allows you to balance the car on the brake in the way into a turn, but then you can get onto the power nice and early and keep a really tight line on exit because of the hard-working LSD. Now, I think the LSD actually feels a little more aggressive in the hatch than the sedan. Not sure if that's placebo or not, but in the hatch it really, earns its pay. In the sedan, it's very effective, but it's probably not as sort of crushing in terms of its operation as you really lean on it through a long uphill corner, for instance. But what the i30 Sedan N can do, which the hatch struggles to do as well, is the long, loping Grand Touring stuff where you're dealing with long straights, long sweepers, not the tight and technical low-speed work, the kind of thing where you're cornering at 100 kilometers per hour or a bit more. This thing feels settled, you can feel the benefit of that longer wheelbase, soaking stuff up, and it's a more relaxing car. It's also a more quiet car. Now, I've already mentioned it's on a different platform, but the other big change that can influence that, as well as the handling dynamics, is that this vehicle uses Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tyres, still a compound developed in conjunction with Hyundai, much like the P0 tyres used on the hatch are a HN Hyundai N specific recipe of herbs and spices, but the Michelins are actually a better road tyre. There's been quite a lot of complaints that I've read online about the premature wear of the P0HNs. We'll see whether that's the case for the PS4S as well. But they're a nice communicative tyre on road where you can really feel the amount of grip as you reach the limit. It sort of bleeds off linearly and you can feel where the car is a little bit better than the P0s. Now, one of the questions I was asked when I put up a post on the channel asking for your questions on the car was how well the N characteristics have been blended with, you know, a saloon feel, a more refined, classic kind of vehicle to drive on a long trip. And hopefully I've just answered that. It's that it blends it really well, actually. If you drop the suspension off into comfort, but you keep other stuff still alive, like the engine in sport, the LSD in sport, it's a great blend. Like, so right now I'm on a pretty broken up bit of blacktop. The suspension is fairly compliant. It's not as comfortable as something like a Sonata N line, which is the company's biggest sedan. It's not as comfortable, I don't think, as an Audi S3 sedan, but it's not far off. But those big 19-inch wheels, low profile tires, you know, this is meant to be a sports car. It's meant to be a performance car more than a luxury car, but I think it does a pretty good job of blending it, and you could easily, comfortably daily this car. It helps that you've got a nice supportive plush seat with seat cooling and extensive electric adjustment for the driver. So that is a good thing. Another question I received was, how does the exhaust sound? Well, let's have a listen. Well, it sounds pretty good. It sounds better in the manual. Every time you lift in the manual with the exhaust sound put into its sport setting, you get crackles and pops if that's your thing that you're into, and I personally am a juvenile and like that. In the DCT, it's a little bit softer, less crackles and pops, but you can chase them if you want to. So I guess that's your choice there. And someone asked if you can turn them off. You can. You just have to run in eco or normal mode, which is not really the point of this car, but not everybody wants to attract attention driving down Main Street or something. I totally understand that. Now, in terms of the safety systems, last thing before we jump on track, they're really well tuned. Hyundai does lane keep assist terrifically well. It holds the center of the lane, it doesn't pogo from side to side, it blends in a discreet fashion and doesn't make you feel like a crap driver if you're momentarily distracted. But this car doesn't have adaptive cruise control. It's just manual. I don't mind that personally, but it could be a consideration if you do a lot of country driving. Next up, we're gonna get off the blacktop. I'm gonna chuck my helmet on and we're gonna talk about how this car rides, handles, and drives at the limit. Okay, so as promised, here we are on track. I've activated chipmunk mode. I've got my helmet on because the i30 Sedan N is actually very capable on track. So we brought it out here, Motorsport Park, big fast track, you know, 210 kilometers per hour down the straight here in this car, turning into turn 1 at 165. And I'm pretty ginger with this stuff. Like I'm not really here to set lap times. I'm not a professional race car driver. But I am trying to get the best I can from this car. And so I'm just putting myself in your shoes as a punter. And, you know, the beauty of a vehicle like this is it's a commuter that's comfortable. You can daily it easily. But then you can rock up even to a serious, difficult, fast track like Motorsport Park. And, you know, you're pretty competitive. So I've been mucking up turn 2 all morning, and I was still putting down 155s here, and I've been able to shave off another 1.5 seconds now that I've corrected that line, and that's not a bad time. Like, and a lot of it is very much in the car. The way that the i30 Sedan N has been set up is to be very, very friendly on track, and it was the case in the initial release of the hatchback that just chucking it into N mode was a bit too stiff, and you get a lot of understeer. That's not so much the case with the sedan. Full N is pretty well set up. There's $2 on the brakes. Nice positive brake pedal, although after about 5 or 6 laps here at Motorsport Park, it does start getting pretty long. But we're working with 360mm front discs, just Hyundai's own brakes on this car. They do stand up to to some pretty good punishment though. Back in, get on the power. There's that grabby LSD. That really is a get out of jail free card in the i30 Sedan N, just like in the hatch. And you can feel the longer wheelbase, the longer body. It's a little bit more wafty, but in actual fact, you can really balance the car beautifully. And even just in ESC Sport, there's plenty of slip there for the taking. Of course, you're not going to set any lap times if you're sliding about the place like a hooligan, but you are getting style points, and it is a lot of fun. Now, interestingly, on the road, I get the sense that the lightest steering mode is actually a little bit too heavy and artificially meaty for my tastes on road. But here on track, it's actually perfect, particularly a big, serious track like this one. So the steering is actually really well set up for this kind of work. ELSD is hard working, perhaps not quite as aggressive as on the hatch, but definitely hard working. And you can just play with the balance so nicely in this thing. It's a very, very friendly, flattering car to drive, and then you can just get on the power, drive it out of corners really well. Grip from the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tyres is good here on track. I definitely think we could be shaving seconds more off our lap time if we chucked on some Cup 2s or some Trofeo Rs. I mean, that's the case for anything, isn't it? But that's definitely what's holding us back here. But that being said, there's still a lot of fun to be had with the PS4S because the car is pretty playful. It's not too sticky. So you can just turn up to a track day, perhaps with a spare set of even just these tires, and you know, have a great time. And you know, you're going to be competitive with you know, a bunch of actually track-ready cars and project cars and stuff that turn up on the same day as you, and you're just driving a stock, pretty luxurious i30 sedan. I think that's awesome. Steering wheel's a good size. Sight lines are good. Visibility is good. The dash cowl and the screens are low enough that they're not getting in your way on track. And the track laps function of the touchscreen is really cool. So it actually just automatically tracks your lap times. At the moment, there's only Motorsport Park and Wakefield, but you don't have to do anything. So it's just using GPS when you pass the start-finish line that's already been programmed into the system. So it's really set and forget. And as you pass the start-finish line, you get a nice bit of validation in big green text in your digital instrument cluster if you have improved your time, or you know, your dreams are crushed with big red font if you're slower and you need to work a little bit harder. The sort of big central tacho on screen is cool. And then, you know, here in the DCT, we have the push to pass, or N grin shift, I should say. You can just, the lift-off oversteer is just epic. It's more plentiful, more there for the taking in the hatch. We do have that long wheelbase that swings around behind us very willingly. And so you can actually get the car pointed straight just by balancing it, by lifting off, getting a little bit on the brake. That's why it's quick around here actually. It's the chassis balance, which is just super well done. There's a local tune on the comfort and sport settings of the suspension. The Sport Plus, which I'm using now, is the global tune, which the guys here at Hyundai's local ride and handling program, they were happy with it. See, there we go. Just let the rear just glide around and then we're pointing straight. I mean, I don't have all that much to say apart from that this is a positive, fun car to use on track, comfortable and quick on the road. $49,000. It feels like value to me. It really does. I actually think it's more fun to drive than a bunch of other kind of halo performance cars that I've driven in the last 18 months. I think it might be more fun to drive than a GR Yaris. Don't come after me, fanboys. You know, I love all cars, but there's something about fast front drive which lets you jump from plateau to plateau as you start to learn the car and know the car. And this is just delightful. Really, it's a really good effort. Now, I think when the original i30 N hatch came out, a lot of people were hailing it as the second coming of Jesus. I wasn't quite there, But I gotta say, the improvements that have gone into the product in the last 4 years and have made their way very much into this brand new sedan version, massive refinements in that time. The chassis is more deft and delicate and agile and not stupidly firm just for the sake of being stupidly firm. It's a really enjoyable driver's car, this one. In terms of negatives out here on track, the manual runs out of headroom in second gear really quickly. The DCT's gearing is much better for a track like Motorsport Park, which is pretty quick. I've mentioned the brake pedal does start to get pretty long after sort of 5 or 6 laps out here. Driving in a pretty punishing way, but you start to feel a little bit, you start to feel it definitely after 5 or 6 laps. And yeah, it's just the fact that we're not on semi-slicks or anything here, so we could definitely be improving our time by investing in a more serious tire, which you could, just use for track purposes and keep the PS4S for the road. Be interesting to track the wear of the PS4S after the complaints about the P0HNs. I was hearing people replacing them after 5,000-6,000 Ks, so let me know your experience below. But yeah, certainly all signs point to positive so far in the sedan. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is it the kind of car you'd take to a track day? Tell me what you're thinking. So those are my first impressions of the 2022 Hyundai i30 Sedan N. If you've been holding out for a hot little sedan like this car, now's a pretty good time to buy. $49,000 seems like a pretty good value piece for a vehicle as talented as this. It's seriously good to drive. It has a hard-working differential. The exhaust sounds awesome. Sure, it is a little rough around the edges in places with some of those hard plastics inside, and it's definitely not frugal, but it feels like we're at pretty much the last point in time here in Australia where you'll be able to buy a vehicle like this without kind of copping a huge emissions tax on it or something like that. So I think if you were holding out, this is probably the right time to move, and certainly it's pretty good value compared to a rival like something like the new Audi S3 sedan, which is going to be kind of $13,000 more expensive than this car. Keen to know your opinion though. Let me know down below this video in the comments whether you're considering an i30 Sedan N. Perhaps the hatch or the Kona N SUV is more up your alley. While you're down there, make sure to hit subscribe and that notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.